Marilyn Monroe is one of those women who will internally survive in history. It's extremely odd but also fantastic how she came from so little and became this larger-than-life, glowing figure that transcended the ages. I don't doubt we will still be talking about her 100 years from now. Her image is so iconic that she is essentially a symbol of Hollywood, beauty, America, and womanhood. She is mystical in a way, this persona she created that mixed in aspects of herself. She's like a mythological goddess we still seek the story of, look to her tragedies, her triumphs, and find enjoyment in the many aspects of her life. I'll confess, I'm a big fan of hers. She was brilliantly beautiful, a burst of light on screen that captured and maintained attention. She was funny, with some of my favorite roles of hers being from her many comedies. She had a pretty singing voice, and she knew how to use her appearance like she was crafting a work of art. She was so incredibly dedicated to honing her skills at acting. She was admirable, wanting to better her life and find happiness, and she did what she could to achieve that. There are other things about Marilyn that strike a deep admiration and relatability to me. Her anxieties, her sadness, her anger. Through learning about her, I found a kindred spirit, a woman who struggled with so much early on in life, trying her best to come out on top in the end. I wish she had been able to find that happiness, I truly do. I could see in her a woman crushed by the world, someone who had been through so much, to the point where the sorrows and the pain destroyed what was left. If you're watching this video, I'm guessing you're familiar with Miss Monroe. If not, her story is tragic in some places, as she dealt with childhood abuses, sexual abuse, alcoholism and drug abuse, mental illness, and, ultimately, suicide. If you're sensitive to these topics, I'd suggest not delving too deeply into her life. Many already know her tale, but it's still a painful and sad thing to look back on and discuss. So, to general audiences, viewer discretion is advised. Marilyn Monroe was born on June 1st, 1926, to Gladys Pearl Baker and an unknown father, originally named Norma Jean Mortensen. She'd be christened soon to the surname of Baker, as her mother Gladys was married to a man at the time of the name of Martin Mortensen, a marriage that would soon crumble within a year. Baker was Gladys's first married name, and her maiden name was Monroe. Marilyn was sent to live with a foster family soon after birth, as Gladys was ill-prepared for a child, but the woman was happy of her new daughter, and went to work to support herself and her baby. The initial foster family Marilyn stayed with were good to her, and Marilyn recalls happy times with Albert and Ida Bollinger. She lived with them until she was 7 years old, and in 1933, her mother would come to take Marilyn to live in Hollywood, an unfamiliar territory as the Bollingers were housed in the rural town of Hawthorne. The house in Hollywood was a small place her mother had taken a loan out on in order to purchase, and she and Marilyn shared the home with two other tenants, George and Maud Atkinson, and their young daughter Nellie. For a short while things seemed to be looking up, but unfortunately Marilyn's childhood was often riddled with hardships. Her mother Gladys would suffer a mental breakdown in 1934 and would be hospitalized. It was there her mother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and this would see her mother in and out of mental hospitals for the rest of her life. This made Marilyn a ward of the state and left her essentially orphaned. A friend of her mother's, Grace Goddard, would assume the responsibility for Marilyn and Gladys's affairs after the breakdown. Marilyn returned to the house her mother had purchased for the next year or so, and during this time it is speculated that Marilyn was sexually abused. Already shy, this abuse caused her to become further withdrawn and develop a stutter. In 1935, Grace Goddard took Marilyn in briefly before sending her to live in an orphanage. Now, this is my speculation, but as we later learn Grace's husband, Doc, would also abuse Marilyn, I do wonder if Grace was trying to initially get Marilyn away from her husband to prevent this. While being put in the orphanage, which was allegedly a model institution, greatly hurt Marilyn, who was only 9 years old at that point. Perhaps Grace felt it was the best thing to do at the time. The orphanage, however, disagreed, encouraging Marilyn to return to the Goddards and for Grace to become her legal guardian. This came true in 1936, and, within months of coming back to live with them, Grace's husband molested a 10-year-old Monroe. Mercifully, her time there only lasted a couple of months, as she was soon sent away to live with relatives of the Goddards, most notably Anna Lower, Grace's aunt. Here she attended school and often went to Christian Science services with her Aunt Anna, experiencing what I imagine was a much-needed break from the turmoil that had occurred thus far. However, Anna Lower was quite an elderly lady. She was soon suffering in her health, making her unfit to care for Marilyn. In 1941, Marilyn returned to live with the Goddards a final time, attending high school, proving herself not especially gifted in any particular areas academically, but still hopeful of the future. It was at the age of 5 a young Monroe decided she wanted to be an actress, so I'm certain she was still holding on to those dreams. In 1952, Doc Goddard would be made to relocate for his job to West Virginia, and legally speaking, the Goddards couldn't take Marilyn with them out of the state. It seemed she would have to return to the orphanage. However, a plan was soon devised. James Daughtry was their neighbor's son, a 21-year-old man with a job working in a factory. He was employed so he could financially support her. He was young enough, and with little other option, Marilyn, who had just turned 16, married James Daughtry on June 19, 1942. She immediately dropped out of high school to become his full-time housewife. This was something Marilyn later declared was incredibly boring and felt her and James were a mixed match. Still, she had nowhere else to turn, so with James she stayed, tending to household chores. The following year, James enlisted in the Marines, and the newlyweds would move to a station just off the coast of California. James Daughtry was deployed to the Pacific in 1944, which made Marilyn have to move in with his parents back home in Van Nuys, where she had lived with the Goddards. She started work in a munitions factory, and this is where history would be made. As a part of contributing to the war effort, photographer David Conover had been sent by a part of the United States Army to take what they called morale-boosting photographs of the women in the factory. Here Marilyn and David met, taking many photographs of her and taking a liking to her. Although none of her photos were used, Marilyn would sign on with Blue Book Model Agency and quit her factory job to become a model. Dubbed one of the most ambitious and hard-working of the models, Marilyn went to work modeling for advertisements, men's magazines, and graced the cover of 33 magazines during her first year there. It was also during this time she dyed her hair more of a blonde shade and lost a lot of the curl her hair sported. Despite protest by her husband, Marilyn continued to pursue a career, and soon signed on with an acting agency to get her foot in the door. Her first interview with Paramount Pictures didn't prove fruitful, but she would be given a screen test at 20th Century Fox, and, despite the head wig being unenthusiastic about her, they brought her on board with a standard 6-month contract just so the studio's rivals couldn't get her. At this time, she divorced her husband and dedicated practically every moment to becoming an actress. She took on the appealing, alliterative title of Marilyn Monroe, as the man who did her screen test thought she looked like 1920s Broadway star Marilyn Miller, and Monroe coming from her mother's maiden name. While she was trying to build up her name and career, she took several acting, singing, and dancing classes, eager to learn everything she could about the world of film performance. Her first 6 months saw her with no work, but she was not idle a minute, as she would even hang around on sets to watch the film process. Her contract was renewed at the start of the following year, and finally she found small parts in 2 films produced by Fox. The studio had enrolled her in dramatic acting classes, but while enthusiastic, her teachers deemed her too shy, and her contract was not renewed that summer. Undeterred, she kept trying to get into the business, befriending influential people, eventually convincing an executive at Fox, a man whom she was allegedly sleeping with, to get her a contract with Columbia Pictures. This worked, and she was brought over in 1948 to start her second stint at becoming a big star. Modeling her now after Rita Hayworth, Marilyn was given one part at Columbia, the first of her leading roles in the film Ladies of the Chorus. Her contract was not renewed with Columbia, and she went on to keep modeling, still determined. She worked with the William Morris Agency, becoming quite intimate with talent agent Johnny Hyde, who proposed marriage to her refusal. He paid for her plastic surgery and helped her get her part in the Marx Brothers film Love Happy. He was also able to negotiate a 7-year contract for her at Fox, but tragically passed away shortly after, devastating Monroe. She appeared in some very critically successful films initially with Fox with her new contract, such as All About Eve and The Asphalt Jungle. Also, some less successful films, like A Ticket to Tomahawk, Red Cross, and The Fireball, which I have personally never seen or heard of in my life before doing research for this. However, she was gaining popularity with audiences and critics alike, seen as a promising newcomer. In 1952, it saw her on the quick and steady rise to stardom. She began a very publicized relationship with New York Yankees ballplayer Joe DiMaggio, was on the cover of Life magazine as the talk of Hollywood, and played in several movies that put her sex appeal on display to much success. Even despite the controversy over her nude photos that had been published that year in a calendar, she was still being called the It Girl of 1952. The next year, she practically burst to fame in some of her most memorable roles. In Niagara, where she plays a femme fatale trying to murder her husband, in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes as a showgirl trying to marry rich, and in How to Marry a Millionaire, which is of similar plot to Gentlemen, but co-stars two of Hollywood's most favorite actresses, Betty Grable and Lauren Bacall. She received Photoplay's Rising Star Award the same year, and was truly becoming a fan favorite, being seen now as one of the most bankable stars and biggest assets to Fox Studios at the time. Despite this, she was earning the same income as when she started out in 1950, and as studio head Daryl Zanuck didn't really like her, refused to cast her in any other dramatic roles and suspended her when she refused to play in The Girl in the Pink Tights. During her suspension, she wed Joe DiMaggio and honeymooned in Tokyo, Japan, combining the trip with a solo stop in Korea to do a USO show for 60,000 soldiers. On her return home, Photoplay magazine awarded her Most Popular Female Star. Eventually, she settled with Fox for a new contract that saw her with a $100,000 bonus and starring role in the film that would immortalize her image in the public consciousness forever, The 7-Year Itch. The 7-Year Itch starred her as an unnamed woman credited as the girl, whom her downstairs neighbor, played by Tom Ewell, fantasizes about having an affair with. The publicity around the film was a firestorm, as the studio decided to record a racy scene in the middle of Manhattan that would forever burn her image into our culture. Nearly everyone knows the scene I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, you've seen the image at least in some form or another. A platinum blonde, blue-eyed, dewy woman in white with her skirts billowing up around her. They filmed this on Lexington Avenue in front of 2,000 people, so many, in fact, that the noise and flash of cameras made the footage unusable and had to be reshot on a closed set back in Hollywood. While the subsequent film was a massive success and had gained her elite movie star status, the act of flashing her underthings in front of so many people had enraged her husband, Joe DiMaggio. The two would divorce immediately after the stunt, only wed for about 9 months. After the divorce, Marilyn left Hollywood, intending to start her own production company, as Fox had fallen flat on their promise of her $100,000 bonus, and kept casting her in strictly sexy blonde roles. Marilyn Monroe Productions was co-headed by herself and her photographer friend Milton Green. It is speculated that her founding this company helped dismantle the restrictive studio system. She also started taking classes at the renowned Actors Studio in New York, becoming close with the esteemed acting teacher Lee Strasberg and his acting coach wife, Paula. Her shyness during this time persisted, so the couple allowed her to take lessons privately in their home. She began dating around this time as well, continuing to see DiMaggio despite the divorce, flirting with famous actor Marlon Brando, and eventually she met writer Arthur Miller, with whom, in spite of being warned against it as he was being investigated by the FBI for connections to communism, she would marry after her divorce with Joe finalized. They legally wed in a courthouse wedding on June 29th, and 2 days later would have a small Jewish ceremony in the privacy of Miller's agent's home. The end of 1955 saw her signing another 7-year contract with Fox, who assured her of a $400,000 bonus this time for work on 4 movies. The first of these was Bus Stop, where she plays a saloon singer whose dreams of stardom are slowed down by a cowboy who falls in love with her. With more liberty granted by the studio, Marilyn had more control on set, which earned her the respect of director Joshua Logan, who compared her to Charlie Chaplin in her acting skill. The next film she would work on would be the first independent production by her studio, Marilyn Monroe Productions. This was The Prince and the Showgirl, co-starring her with respected actor Laurence Olivier in a period piece comedy where Olivier's prince pursued Monroe's showgirl. Filming of this movie was very bumpy and difficult, as the two actors immediately disagreed on several points, infuriating Olivier and wounding Monroe. Marilyn would intentionally delay shooting by showing up late or not at all, in retaliation to Olivier's comment of her just playing sexy after seeing her fail to replicate the original style of the role. It was completed on schedule, however, and was met with mixed reviews, most favorable to European audiences. After shooting ended on The Prince and the Showgirl, Marilyn took a hiatus to focus on starting a family with Arthur Miller. She had already suffered a miscarriage during the filming of the movie, and would tragically suffer another one in the midst of 1957. Around a year later, Marilyn returned to Hollywood to film another of her most memorable works, Some Like It Hot, which paired her with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. The production process would again prove trying for everyone involved, as Marilyn and famed director Billy Wilder disagreed on how to play the role of Sugar Cane. She allegedly ruined takes on purpose, so there was an unending stream of retakes. So much so that, during the scene where Marilyn and Tony Curtis's character kiss, Curtis likened kissing her to kissing Hitler due to the sheer amount of times they had to do it. Yet, in the end, the film released to much success, earning Marilyn a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. Marilyn took another hiatus from working until the end of 1959, when she was set to play in another romantic comedy, Let's Make Love. She had her husband, playwright Arthur Miller, rewrite parts of the script that Marilyn thought were too weak, and mainly agreed to work on the movie due to her obligations to Fox Studios. In the film, she played opposite French actor Yves Montand, whom she had an affair with, and the studio ran with it in the publicity to promote the movie. It was not successful, meeting stale and unfavorable reviews. Director of the iconic and still popular film Breakfast at Tiffany's, Truman Capote, had wanted Marilyn for the starring role of Holly Golightly, but the studio refused due to its fear of her complicating production. Of course, this role would go to an equally legendary actress, Audrey Hepburn. The final movie Marilyn was to complete was The Misfits, which Arthur Miller had adapted for her to prove her talents as a dramatic actress, though he based a lot of the character on Monroe's own personality and struggles, which she was not very happy about. She was set to play with famed actors Eli Wallach, Montgomery Clift, and Clark Gable, whom she admired deeply. Of course, as with all her movies within the last few years, the filming process was rough. Arthur and Marilyn's marriage was essentially over. The desert landscape was grueling, as temperatures could rise as high as 108 degrees Fahrenheit, and within 2 days of the end of filming, Clark Gable suffered a heart attack and passed away before the movie's released. Clark's wife at the time blamed Marilyn for his death, stating that her constant interruptions to filming put extra stress on him. Marilyn admired Clark Gable so much that, having seen his movies as a child, used to say in girlhood that he was her father. Needless to say, she was very troubled by his wife's accusations. The Misfits was deemed a box office disaster, just barely earning back its estimated budget. Health issues plagued Marilyn at the start of 1961. She had been suffering with gallstones during the shooting of The Misfits, and had to undergo a surgery to remove her gallbladder, as well as a surgery to treat the source of her inability to have children. She spent 4 weeks in a hospital for depression, as her usage of prescription drugs and alcohol had taken over a lot of her life, and she was generally struggling a lot through this time. She returned to Hollywood one last time to begin working on the film Something's Got to Give, a remake of an earlier film, My Favorite Wife, produced in 1940 and originally starring Irene Dunne as a wife reuniting with her husband and children after being thought to be lost at sea. It was set to star alongside Marilyn, beloved singer and actor Dean Martin, and famed dancer and actress Sid Cerise as the woman Monroe's husband was about to wed before her sudden and unexpected return. Before the scheduled start of shooting, Marilyn developed sinusitis and was advised to postpone. However, the studio pushed on, publicly declaring she was faking it. Shooting commenced up until mid-May, when Marilyn took a break in order to travel to New York City to sing for President John F. Kennedy at his birthday celebrations at Madison Square Gardens. This she did in spite of being threatened by Fox, and they would go on to try to sue her for hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. She was effectively fired, Even though she had just recorded some extremely risque scenes of her swimming completely naked in a swimming pool where studio executives even invited journalists and photographers to come and take pictures. This would ultimately be where the film ended in production, at least with Marilyn and Dean Martin as stars. It would later be picked up again, renamed Move Over Darling, and cast a very different type of actress, Doris Day, as its lead in place of Marilyn. Fox would try to repair the damage done by their sudden smear campaign against her, negotiating and apparently reaching an agreement with her on her contract, as it was soon to end, and a starring role in an upcoming film called What a Way to Go, set to release in 1964. She was photographed one final time in what the photographer, Bert Stern, called The Last Sitting for Vogue magazine, her first and only time being in the reputed magazine. Marilyn Monroe died August 5, 1962, at the age of 36 of an apparent suicide. She had several lethal doses of prescription medication in her system, having been discovered alone in her bedroom by her maid. Her death made front-page news worldwide, and suicides in the area allegedly increased in the wake of her passing. Her funeral was arranged by ex-husband Joe DiMaggio and her business manager, Inez Melson, held in a quiet, private procession attended by her closest friends and associates. She is buried in crypt number 24 in the Corridor of Memories at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery.
Do I feel happy in life? Let's see. Let's say I hope I'm finding happiness. Right? Well, for me, if I can realize certain things in my work, I come the closest to being happy, and I can say that also about my life. Well, it only happens, I think, in moments, sometimes when I'm working, and I'll be able to fulfill a scene truthfully, and then I think I'm the happiest. Well, I find it very stimulating to keep studying and working, but I'm not just generally happy. If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.